Adolf Hitler, the indomitable Nazi leader, is now Chancellor of Germany. Inspired by his terrific driving force, the Nazi movement he created in 1920 has grown into a mighty army. And this unflinching patriot, whose burning zeal fires the imagination of his countrymen, wields authority over 30 million...
Walked up the steps for the frank and friendly talk, two men carrying between them the fate of 20 million. All the details of handing over the Sudeten territory to Germany were discussed. The dates and the manner of taking over, and the new frontiers on the map of Europe. And we give you history in the making, the actual signing of the agreement which meant peace for Europe. The decisions arrived at in Munich concerning Czechoslovakia were placed immediately before the government.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is a paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine. Some of you perhaps have already heard what it contains, but I would just like to read it to you. We, the German Führer and Chancellor, and the British Prime Minister have had a further meeting today and are agreed in recognizing that the question of Anglo-German relations is of the first importance for the two countries and for Europe. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again. We are resolved that the method of consultation shall be the method adopted to deal with any other questions that may concern our two countries, and we are determined to continue our efforts to remove possible sources of difference and thus to contribute to assure the peace of Europe.
Of a German army on the march echoes in Europe. Where that march may end, no man can foretell, least of all the man who gave the order. But here before our eyes unfolds the drama of a nation dying. Hitler's troops enter Moravia. At Munich, the Führer gave his word that he wanted no more land in Europe. These pictures show you what his word is worth. Hungary, too, has marched across her border into the state of Czechoslovakia. Again, the Goma British cameras give you raw history. These pictures come from the villages of Bori, Yazo, and Varga. But these Hungarian troops would never have marched had it not been for the... Since that day, many have endured this agony. We in Britain have known it in many, many of ours. This in the Second World War was the first.
when peace has been broken anywhere, the peace of all nations everywhere is in danger.
After 7 months, the war has suddenly flared up into a tremendous conflagration with the Nazi invasion of Norway and Denmark. While the Allied mine layers were at work, German forces were already on their way to complete yet one more act of aggression against weak and innocent neutrals. It was obviously impossible. German troops performed their familiar function of rolling across yet another neighboring frontier into southern Jutland. German bombers patrolled the coast. At the same time, landings were effected at different Danish and Norwegian ports. This is a brief selection of the pictures shown in our last issue of the Second Great Fire of London, the indiscriminate attack by Hitler's airmen upon the centre of the Empire's business. This is the fire that destroyed ancient buildings that have been the object of pilgrimages from all over the world for countless years. This was the Great Fire in the City of London, almost to be compared with the Fire of London in 1666. Pictures that look like hell on earth. The world will see these pictures of a raid that was not aimed at military objectives, only at the things that men and women have loved for centuries. The churches built by Christopher Wren after the Fire of London, the famous buildings of the Civic Company, the Guildhall. We can take even this, because we know that in the end we shall defeat these foul German brutes. It merely serves as a spur to British determination to win this war. Look steadily upon these shattered buildings. Perhaps many a time you have walked these solemn streets that are now disheveled and unrecognizable in the birth of this new year, 1941. This is the sign of what a Nazi conquest would mean to all the right and decent things of life. This is what we are fighting against, the triumph of brutality and force. This is what we must and will defeat. The fields of corn were made by God to feed his children. The senseless jackboot of a German tramples it into the ground. The swaying stalks conceal an army of murderers awaiting the chance to kill. How many years will it take the world to put this right? How many years will pass before we can make good the years of waste? These pictures were taken in Tobruk, a flare-up of activity, the first advance patrols feeling out weak spots. For 7 months, the garrison of Tobruk wrote pages of glorious history for the armies of the British Empire. Now you are looking at men who are straining like greyhounds to be in among the enemy with a real attack. RAF fighters obtained a virtual command of the air before the Great Desert Battle began, but Tobruk endured almost daily and nightly raids by isolated Nazi bombers. A derelict truck was set out as decoy target. Honolulu. First pictures of the attack on the Hawaiian island delivered while Japanese envoys talked of peace in Washington. Japanese bombers overhead. Into the simple, melodious lives of the sons and daughters of sunshine, there has burst a rising sun, blood red. The family car of some civilized men and women is a memory of horror, pitted and torn with screaming metal. Japanese warplanes machine gun the streets in the approved Nazi fashion. Yes, the little warmongers of Nippon have learned very thoroughly the lessons of German barbarism. This is a two-man submarine captured in the attack on the American fleet in Pearl Harbor. There's no denying that Japan has scored big successes in the war in the Pacific. No denying that Americans who lived as we did once in the hopes of peace could have been more prepared for war. In the landing craft, marines and equipment, this operation was carried out as a complete surprise, opening up with a bombardment. Like nearly all naval actions, it all looks a bit vague and distant, but there's nothing vague where those shells are landing. The Marines go ashore to overcome what remains of resistance, to turn out the Japanese from the island they conquered so recently. This was a Japanese camp. It has now become a stronghold of American Marines from which they can clear the islands completely. The stars and stripes go up in place of the rising sun. That's cause for congratulation.
Kongu is in the grip of the flames and nothing could save it. Outside the jungle, Burma is tinder dry at this time of the year. A single incendiary bomb would have started a big blaze, let alone scores of them with some HE thrown in. I don't know how many people were killed. It happened so suddenly that hundreds must have been trapped. Those that escaped formed into the inevitable army of the lost and hopeless. God pity them, man won't. Rome, meanwhile, is nevertheless a prize in the greatest Allied victory of the war. There could have been few more joyous events in the long history of the ancient city. With ecstatic fervor, the people acclaim the liberators. Rome is the first great capital to be freed from the Nazis. After 4 years, the German heel is lifted from the neck of the Italian people. Drawn there by the promise that they would be addressed by His Holiness the Pope, nearly 500,000 people crowded into the great square. Pius XII said to them, "Thanks be to God, Rome has been spared the horrors of war by both belligerents." Over the channel there was heavy cloud.
are on their way to this island fortress only 8 miles square and 625 nautical miles from Tokyo. Back from these destructive missions come the planes of the task force, many of them bearing the scars of battle. Others find it impossible to land. Enemy mortars keep the landing barges under continuous heavy fire. After a direct hit, a naval cameraman lies dead on the deck. Tanks land on the beaches and add the weight of their guns to the growing power of the assault. This Japanese soldier never lived to find fresh cover. Thousands of the enemy were killed and only a few prisoners were taken to the transports lying offshore. In nearly 2 weeks, only 85 surrendered, and half of these were slaves from Korea forced into the Japanese army. And now, naval cameramen bring the first films of suicide planes in action, power diving at 600 miles an hour. Tokyo, 20,000 feet below.
The all-shattering devastation in which was born the atomic age. In its birth pangs, 75,000 people were killed, 70,000 injured.
Taking his place at the surrender table, Shigemitsu reads through the terms.
Japan has today surrendered. The last of our enemies is laid low.
From the USA come first pictures of the nationwide reaction to victory. To a packed press conference, President Truman gives the long-awaited announcement.
I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan.
Stampeding to the nearest phone box, reporters spread the news to a waiting world. From the East Coast to the West, Americans' millions had only been waiting the official word to go completely wild.